Hello everybody, welcome to the Daily Sip. My name is Oliver and my mission is to bring you closer to organic Japanese green tea. And today what we're gonna dive into are the basics of matcha. Some of you might know this beautiful green powder which has come into vogue more and more over the recent time. So this tea is something which is taking also a little bit America, the US and also Europe by storm. And it has been a huge development in the last years on matcha. But what is actually matcha? Often people ask me. So today the idea is really that we dive a little bit into what is matcha, where is it coming from, and then we're gonna look at a little bit at the different qualities of matcha. And then in the end I will just talk with you or talk to you a little bit about what is actually the difference between higher grades and lower grades and how these grades actually develop or what are the main difference between them. So when we talk about matcha, matcha is a ground green tea. So it's a finely ground green tea which is coming from the top leaves, or normally the top leaves of the tea plant. Many people don't know this, but matcha has been introduced in 1191 by the monk Eisai to Japan, and it has become very fast a part of the so-called tea ceremony, which was perfected until the 15th century in Japan, where monks had their typical way of preparing the green tea within the scope, within the frame of the tea ceremony. And matcha since then has always had in Japan this strong link to a more of a Zen Buddhist or to a more of a spiritual tea, or tea in general, green tea in general in Japan has had this link to the spiritual side of the tea drinking. What is important to know in Japan, that when you talk about green tea before the 18th century, where the rolling method was invented, so the typical sencha rolling, most of the green tea in Japan was consumed through powder form. So the powder form or matcha form was actually that green tea which is has been used before the rolling method came really into vogue and overtook the market quite strongly. But until the 18th century, the main type or way of drinking green tea was really in powdered form. So actually matcha is quite a lot older than the typical sencha, which is drank today a lot in Japan. So matcha, you might say that it has been the original form, and only after the 18th century the market turned around and people started to consume more leaf tea. Originally matcha is made out of leaves which are finely also chopped into smaller parts. So matcha is, or the basic of matcha is the so-called tencha. These are typical tencha leaves. Tencha leaves are nothing more than long shaded leaves, mainly used for gyokuro. If they're rolled, they become gyokuro, but if they are not rolled, laid out flat, then they stay tencha and they will be chopped into smaller parts. And especially important is that you destem and devein the leaves, that you have the basis of matcha, which then is the tencha used later, put into the stone mills, and then after ground into this fine powder which we see here. So tencha is the basis. Tencha is in the frame of the tea ceremony. It is not allowed to drink tencha as a tea, but you can absolutely do it. I did it the other day and I tried it, and what I have to say is really that it is very fine. So tencha is already this destemmed and deveined leaves, and they're very fine, very light. They give a beautiful first steeping, but it doesn't carry me through several steepings like a gyokuro, where you can brew the tea from 3 to 4 times. With the tencha, more or less after the first and latest the second, the taste is lost. So they're much finer and it's a much lighter tea, but very sweet. This is about the tencha. Then when you go into the quality of organic Japanese green tea and organic Japanese matcha, you can find mainly two different qualities. Sometimes we talk about three different types of quality in matcha. So one is, certainly you've heard of it, is the so-called ceremonial matcha. So the ceremonial matcha, or also high-grade matcha, premium matcha is also used. Sometimes there's a distinction between premium and ceremonial matcha, as the ceremonial matcha is considered to only or to also be used for the koicha. The koicha is a little bit the thicker, and then you have the usucha matcha, the so-called drinking matcha. But when we leave this aside, so we have mainly two distinctions. One is the culinary grade or cooking grade matcha, maybe you've heard of this term, and the other one is the ceremonial grade. And what the main difference is actually that for the ceremonial grade, only the top leaves, the top shaded leaves, destemmed, deveined leaves are used. Meanwhile, the culinary grades are often the lower leaves, the later leaves as well, the lower leaves of the tea plant, and also they are not always destemmed and deveined as the high grade tea, resulting into the effect that the culinary grade has a much lighter color, and this you can see when we compare the two teas. So you can really see here the culinary grade, the ceremonial grade here on this side, and you can really see that there's a big difference in color, and this is mainly coming from the richness of the tea. As the culinary grade is not also not only not always destemmed and deveined, it's coming from the lower leaves, and it's coming as well from later harvests. Meaning, if you're having a good high-grade ceremonial tea, matcha tea, you will get always, or you get it most times, the first harvest. Sometimes there exist blends between first and second harvest, but of high quality leaves. So it's absolutely possible that you get it from the first and second harvest, but most ceremonial grade matcha is coming from the first harvest. And this tea is actually the most nutrient rich tea. Here we talk about 4 to 5 times of the nutrients which are in this tea versus this one here. The reason comes from the fact that over winter there is no harvesting, so Japan is too cold that they are growing leaves during the winter time, and then they harvest any leaves. So latest in autumn they stop to harvest the leaves, and then in springtime they take it up again, and then they harvest the very first leaves, so-called shincha, so first harvest. And there, or ichibancha, is also so the first tea in the year, and from this ichibancha the main ceremonial grade matcha is coming from, and there the plant is able to absorb during the winter time all the nutrients. It is really filled with amino acids, with all the different minerals which are in the tea plants. We also have catechins in there, and what is also important is that the plants in the first harvest, when they are high quality, they are often shade grown, meaning that in the last 20 to 30 days, depending on the farmer, the tea plants are shaded. And what happens in this shading process is that you have the theanine and the catechins. Normally when you leave the tea plant at the sunlight, the catechin level increases while the theanine level decreases, because the theanine is then transformed into catechins. But what actually happens with the shade grown, that this process doesn't happen, so it stays a little bit on the same level. Even the theanine level is higher, and then you don't have this turnover. So really the theanine is predominant in this tea, making the tea more of its umami, this savory taste, and sweetness is a lot of triggered. So you get much more of a complex, a more kind of full, rich, full-bodied taste profile for the tea. Meanwhile, when you have the culinary grade also with a lower amount of amino acids especially, or also minerals, is less rich in taste, making the powder a little bit in taste wise, nearly a little bit sandy. So you got a little bit of a more of a malty and sandy texture. It's much less rich in taste, in sweetness. And what is also often the case is, as they don't shade the tea anymore in the second or the third harvest, then you have the catechins, which are much higher. So the tea is much bitter. So that's why the culinary grade often is very bitter, and I just gonna prepare these two and just explain you a little bit taste-wise what the difference is. But this is the main difference. So if you're getting, if you want to have the most or the sweetest matcha, try to get, when possible, ask your vendor if it is ceremonial or at least first harvest. So first harvest is very important. It has to be shade grown. And these are the main question you can ask, because often you don't see the powder, but when you look at the powder, really look for this beautiful green, intense green color. This is very important. Good. So let's go then into the brewing or the preparation of this tea. Let's leave these aside. Then the chawan. Using 2 grams of matcha, and sift the matcha always when you're able, when you're at home preparing your matcha and your tin is already open. Try just to sift it. It's an absolute normal process that the green tea absorbs a little bit of humidity. This is normal for the green tea leaves. Nothing deteriorating the quality. It's just something that happens as this is dried, or these are dried leaves, and they absorb a little bit of humidity. So in both cases I use 2 grams of matcha, which is around a half of a teaspoon, and then we're gonna sift this through as well for the culinary grade. Using the same amount of water for both of them. Then taking my matcha whisk, so-called chasen. If you don't have a matcha whisk, what actually works pretty well too is a milk frother. So if you have a chance to use a milk frother, you can easily do that. With a normal whisk, it's a little bit complicated, because what is nice about the chasen is actually it brings a lot of air, and the more hairs you have, so you should be around 80 hairs with the matcha whisk, and then you have very nice and fine matcha. So let's go into this one here. So here you can see very beautiful In terms of quantity of water, I suggest you to use around 100 milliliter for these 2 grams. So, and then you will get a beautiful tea, which has also a good quantity. And let's see now how the difference is of these 2 matchas. So you can already see, also when you're ordering a matcha in a coffee, just look at the color of the matcha. It should have a nice green color, and if you have a latte, you also see normally the nice green color, even though it is mixed with the milk. So often you can already spot it with the eye if the quality of the matcha is on a high level. So let's go directly into the ceremonial. It's very sweet, round. I get a little bit of florally notes. There's a nice creamy texture, a little bit of a silky texture thanks to the chasen, which brings a little bit more of this air into the matcha itself. It stays very sweet. There's a nice vegetal note, so you get a lot of different complex taste notes from the matcha, and mainly you really feel the sweetness, and I really have it now tingling in my palate. It's like this beautiful sweetness swirling around my tongue, and this is something I highly appreciate when I drink a high grade matcha. Now let's go into the culinary grade. I already feel it in the beginning. It's very, very bitter. So already in the beginning, at the top of the tongue, it starts with this bitterness. So it becomes very, very, very bitter. And this is the main difference between the high grade quality or high grade matcha or ceremonial grade between the culinary grade. It's really, you don't have that bitterness due to the fact that it has much more of theanine, so much more of these aminos inside, which sweeten the tea and they suppress as well the catechins. So you have the same effect of the tea on a health aspect when you look at the catechins, but here you have much more other minerals, much richer tea in minerals, so it's a much on the health side. It's a much more filled tea with good minerals for your body. Meanwhile, this one here is not only much bitter, but it's also much more bitter, but it is also on the level of the minerals and the nutrients, much at a lower level. So what I suggest you is to really go also for the ceremonial grade, because in the end, price-wise, the culinary grade might be better, might be cheaper, but in the end, as you have like 4 to nearly 5 times more nutrients in this one here compared to the culinary grade, then you often save money by just buying the better quality directly at the beginning. Good. This was this. I hope you liked it, and if you have ever any questions, I'm more than happy to answer it. And if you want me to cover once a topic about something you would like or you want to know, I'll be more than happy to do so. Okay, this was this Daily Sip of today. Thanks a lot for watching. I guess I see you tomorrow. Bye.